Hey guys, welcome back to Hike Oregon. In today's video, I'm going to be going over 8 things that I learned while backpacking in 2022. If you are new here, welcome to the Hike Oregon channel. I make hiking and backpacking vlogs, as well as gear reviews and just general tips and tricks videos to help you become a more confident hiker and backpacker. If you enjoy content like that, click that red subscribe button and the notification bell so that you are notified every time I make a new video. My hiking goal in 2022 was to do a ton of backpacking, and I definitely achieved that goal. I spent a total of 21 nights in my tent throughout the summer, and I absolutely loved every second of it. However, I felt like in 2022 in particular, I learned a ton of lessons on my backpacking trip. So throughout the summer, I made mental note of some of these big things that I learned. Even though I have been hiking and backpacking for years and years, I keep learning really valuable lessons. So I thought I would share those lessons with you today. So the first one that I wrote down is correctly storing your bear canister. If you have not seen my Wild Rogue Loop video, I will link that here. It has the full bear story about how we didn't really store our bear canisters correctly. We just kind of nestled them together in a little bit of a hollow at the base of some trees. And this bear carried one off. He probably didn't carry it, he probably rolled it. But this is not something we were aware of that it could happen. After this trip, I actually posted a little survey on my Instagram, and a ton of people said this same thing has happened to them. There must be a better way to store a bear canister. So I did some research, and so we didn't really store them incorrectly. We just didn't store them all the way correctly. The canister is round and slippery for a reason. They don't want the bear to be able to grab it and carry it off, or bite it and carry it off. So they make it slippery and round for a reason. So if you can somehow wedge it in between some rocks, or wedge it under a root, or in something that you find, maybe a log or something, so that the bear can't somehow grab an edge and get it out and away from whatever you've wedged it into and then roll it off. That is what I recommend. Does it work every time? Probably not. Is this kind of thing available every time? Probably not. In the Sierras, we didn't have a lot of trees and such, so we've always found some sort of rock formation that we could maybe wedge the canisters into, or we set like rocks around it so that it was harder for the bear to grab it and roll it away. Keep that in mind. The bear might roll your canister away and you might not see it the next day. And on that note, I want to reiterate that if you have medication, do not put it in your toiletries bag that is going to go into your canister. This happened to us, and it was a very valuable lesson. My friend, whose canister ultimately went missing on this Wild Rogue Loop trail, she basically just put her whole toiletries bag in the canister because, I mean, it has toothpaste, lotion, first aid kit stuff, you know, all the smelly things. So she just put the whole kit into the canister. And unfortunately, it had her medications in it that she needed for the next day. The biggest one being her inhaler, which was not great the next day when we encountered some grasses and stuff where she had allergies and really could have used the inhaler. Generally, medication doesn't smell, so it's not going to be something that's going to attract bears. So don't put them in the canister, keep them in your tent. That way, if the canister goes missing, you won't have issues the next day. The second one that I wrote down is, if you use Gaia, trust in the Gaia snow depth overlay. There's been some years where I'm like, you know, that doesn't look like a lot of snow and whatever. And honestly, last year and this year, this got us in a little bit of trouble. So last year we got my friend's 4Runner stuck in the snow. And this year I tried not to ignore it as much and was a little bit more wary of, okay, it says there's a lot of snow here, let's make alternate plans. So I want to reiterate that the Gaia snow depth layer is really, really useful, and it does get updated, and it is much, much better than the satellite pictures that you sometimes get on like CalTopo or something like that. Gaia has satellite pictures as well, and those don't get updated as much. So if you want a pretty accurate snow depth overlay, Gaia is your place to go, and it is pretty accurate, and I would highly recommend listening to that. The next one that I wrote down is don't rely on seasonal streams that are depicted on maps. So maps depict seasonal streams, streams that flow most of the year, lakes, rivers, and springs. So I highly, highly recommend that you do not rely on these seasonal creeks, because while the map says there are seasonal creeks, even in an area where there is still snow melting, like there's meadows with standing water because the snow melted like 3 days prior, the seasonal creeks might not be there. And they could just be there for like a week while the snow is actively melting. But there's no way to know that. So I highly recommend to not rely on that and just to rely on the springs that you see on the map, as well as the creeks that should be flowing most of the time, as well as lakes. We definitely ran into an issue trying to rely on these seasonal creeks. They were nowhere to be found, even though there were still snow berms and actively melting snow in this area, but these seasonal creeks probably only flow a couple days out of the year, and they were all dried up already. We actually had to find a spring that was nearby. Thank God there was one, because otherwise we would have been in trouble. My next one is pack more food than you think you'll need, especially at high elevations. At higher elevations, my body at least, and I've heard this from a few other hikers, you are just more hungry. So the loop in the Sierras that we did this year was at really high elevation all the time, like the entire time. And I was famished the entire time. I did not take enough food at all. I didn't really take enough food on most of my backpacking trips, but that's besides the point. Being at high elevation made me way more hungry, and I highly recommend that you take more food than you think you'll need. You will never be sad about having an extra snack, whether that be in the, mid-morning or in the afternoon. There is nothing worse than getting to camp at like 4 or 5 p.m. and being absolutely famished, but it's too early to eat dinner, because you know if you eat dinner right now, you'll be starving by 9 p.m. or wake up in the middle of the night with your stomach just eating itself. Always take those few extra snacks. Take a dessert, splurge a little. I know it's extra weight, but it's so worth it. The next lesson that I learned was to cool down before you get too hot. I hiked in very hot weather this year, and a lot of the time I was able to get up at 4:30 in the morning and do a lot of morning hiking and end earlier in the day. And that was really, really helpful to keep our temperatures down. When we got to camp in the early to mid-afternoon, we would always try to cool down in the lake or the river or something like that. Now, on the last day of my Benson Lake loop in the Sierras, it was really hot, and even though we were going downhill, I got overheated for some reason. I could not drink enough water. I was getting lightheaded. I was just so hot. And instead of stopping in the shade and sitting down, or stopping by the lake and cooling down my arms and legs, I just kept hiking because it was the last day of our trip and we really just wanted to get to the trailhead and eat lunch. That was not smart, and I could have ended up in a really dangerous situation had we not gotten to the trailhead and I went into a store and there was AC. Even with that, I took hours to cool down. Hours after ending the hike, being in the car on the way out, blasting the AC on me, it still took hours for me to cool down. It really could have been a dangerous situation. So the lesson was learned. It's now in my head. When I feel like that, doesn't matter how close I am to the trailhead, I need to sit down and I need to cool off because it can end in heat stroke, which is really dangerous. Okay, 2 more items real quick. Make sure to check your first aid kit at the beginning of the backpacking season. Go through all the items, make sure nothing has spilled or leaked in there. Make sure you have enough band-aids, bandages, tape, antibacterial ointment, all the things you will need for the season. Make sure your first aid kit has it. We ran into an issue in the Wallowas this year where my friend, she fell on a log that had a stick pointing out of it and basically punctured her arm on the stick. The puncture wound was pretty deep. We looked in her first aid kit and found that some Technu had actually leaked and made all her band-aids useless because oil had leaked on them, so they were no longer sticky. So while she had a lot of band-aids, they were completely useless. So I had a few band-aids, thank God. They weren't super big, but we used a couple of them, but it could have not been great. I had antibacterial ointment as well, but we didn't have a lot of supplies once we realized her first aid kit was pretty much useless because of what had leaked. So always check your supplies, make sure you have enough stuff because something could happen on your next backpacking trip. And my last lesson that I learned and tip I want to share with you guys is always have a plan B, C, D, E, F, etc. And just go into your backpacking trip with the mindset of being flexible. There's only been one backpacking trip in the last 10 years of backpacking that has gone 100% according to plan with nothing going wrong during the trip. That's tons and tons and tons of backpacking trips where there's always something, at least one thing that is going wrong during the trip. Whether that be there's too much snow on the route and you have to find a different route, or there's not enough water sources, you have to find a different route, or the trail doesn't exist anymore, you have to find a different route, or maybe the road to the trailhead is actually not passable and you have to find a different trailhead altogether and do a different hike. Anything can happen. Maybe there's a river that's too high on your loop and you have to turn around and see if you can find something else. There are just so many things that can go wrong just on the way to the trailhead, to be honest, where you might have to do a plan B. And then of course in the backcountry, you can't plan for anything, right? Whether that be a wildfire breaks out, it starts snowing maybe randomly in the middle of the summer, that can happen at high elevations. You never know. Your bear canister gets stolen by the bear and you have to cut your trip a day short. Anything can happen. So always have a plan B, C, D, E, whatever, and just be flexible. Know the area that you're going to really well so that it's easy for you to kind of change plans on the go. And a little safety tip, if you're going to change plans on the go, make sure to send your loved ones a message that you're changing plans so that they know where you are. So those are all the lessons that I learned during my backpacking adventures in 2022. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you don't already, check me out over on Instagram. That's where I post pictures from all of my recent hiking adventures. And if you want to hike and backpack here in this amazing state of Oregon, check out my website, hikeoregon.net, where you'll find tons of information there, as well as access to purchase my hiking guidebooks that I've written over the years. I upload 4 videos a month on this channel, so if you have any video suggestions for me that you want to see, go ahead and comment those below. I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next adventure.